أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين المنتجبين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. We have, over the course of these nights, over the course of these blessed nights, have been talking about the Holy Quran. We have looked at a number of surahs from which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sending us a diverse range of very deep messages that we can understand on a personal, on a societal, and on a historical level. And inshallah, we will continue down that road tonight by looking at Surah al Sharh. Now, Surah al Sharh, it represents a conversation between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His beloved Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa And it is very similar to Surah Duha, which comes just before it. And just like this surah, it mentions a number of blessings, 3 blessings that the RasoolAllah has received. And then it goes on to instruct the Rasulullah where to go from there. There is a similar structure in the ayat which are used, in the message that is given. And in fact, they are so closely related that when we recite Salah, according to a lot of the maraja, including Ayatollah Sistani, that if we are to recite Surah al Sharh, we have to combine it with Surah al-Duha, just like Surah Quraysh and Surah Fi. So we do our Surah al-Hamd, and then Surah al-Sharh, and then Surah al-Duha as well. Not just one on its own. That's how closely linked these surahs, they are inseparable. But while Surah al-Duha, it focuses more on interaction with other individuals, the poor, the orphans, so on and so forth, Surah al-Sharh, it talks more about inward reflection. And the basic summary of the surah is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He starts by addressing Rasulullah and giving him an account of some of the blessings he has received. Then He gives him some condolences, and then He moves on to instruction as to where to go from here. And this surah, it is one of the surahs which we have a particular blessing for reciting. There's a wonderful tradition in Majmu'ul Bayan. And just take note of that reference. Majmu'ul Bayan, it is one of the greatest tafsirs in the history of Shia Islam by Shaykh al-Tabrisi, and it's one that we've used extensively throughout all of the nights. Now, hold on to that because we're going to come back to Majmu'ul Bayan later. But there is a hadith which says that the one who recites this surah, it is as if he has met Rasulullah A'zam and he has taken the grief out of his heart. That we share in Allah's consolation to His holy Prophet. Such is the virtue of reciting this surah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alam nashrah laka sadrak. Did we not expand for you your chest? Did we not is a reference to invoking gratitude, that Allah is saying something proudly. And expansion of the chest, it refers to a couple of things which you can combine. It's mentioned a few times in the Quran. So for example, in Surah Taha, verses number 25 to 28, Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he has this famous dua, رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. And he asks for the expansion of his chest. O Lord, expand my chest. Make my affair easy for me. Untie a knot from my tongue that they may understand me clearly. And similarly in Surah An'am verse 125, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he talks about guidance and misguidance, he refers to the expansion of the chest and the constriction of the chest. And from this, we can understand that the expansion of the chest of RasoolAllah, it refers to the fact that Allah is opening up his capacity in order to receive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, to receive prophethood, to receive the Holy Quran. So it is a profound blessing that he is receiving. And it is important to note that the Quran, it is not easy for a human being to receive this revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For Allah, He reminds us in Surah al Sharh, verse number 21, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, لَوْ أَنزَلْنَا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى جَبَلٍ لِرَأَيْتَهُ خَاشِعًا مُتَصَدِّعًا مِّنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. That if we revealed this Quran upon a mountain, you would have seen it humbled and split apart. So Rasulullah, when he receives this, it is a profound revelation. And hence, we have that famous tradition in Sahih Muslim, which we've looked at throughout these nights, that Rasulullah leaves behind two weighty things, the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt. And in one way, their weighty is the effect and the predominance they have over us, but also over the weight of their bearing as well. But on top of that understanding of the expansion of the chest, we can look at Surah Hijr. وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. That we are aware that your chest is weighed down by what they say. So it also refers to the Holy Prophet's capacity to suffer. And so we can combine these two meanings of the Holy Quran and say that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says expansion of Rasulullah's chest, He is referring to the expansion to allow in God's light, God's knowledge, but also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's tranquility and support. And if we want to achieve anything in this world, it is essential that we are ready to be criticized. Because if we try and achieve anything, we do anything of worth, not something vacuous or meaningless, but something truly worthwhile, there is going to be criticism. Because we're trying to effect a change in the world around us. And people are resistant to change. Because if you make an improvement, maybe they have to make an improvement too. Or at the very least, it makes them feel bad about themselves. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He expands the Holy Prophet's chest to be ready to deal with any sort of difficulty that comes his way. And he had difficulty throughout his life. And Sharh, it refers, some of the Mufassirin, they say that it's a reference to the cutting of the chest of Rasulullah, the removal of the heart and the cleaning of the heart physically. But that, it doesn't fit with what the Quranic word used here. Sharh, it never means to cut. This is the only way these traditions, if they're accepted, is they can be understood metaphorically and only metaphorically. So with this though, with sharh, what does sharh mean? It means explanation, but it means uncovering something which is difficult to understand, something which is obscure. So when Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, when he is being told about the expansion of the chest and the explanation therein, it talks about how important it is, again reinforcing that message about the importance of Quran and Ahlul Bayt, that we need them to help teach us the Holy Quran. وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ ظَهْرَكَ. And lift from you your burden that weighed heavily on your back. And the words here that are used are really interesting, because some of the Mufassirun, they look at this verse, they take wizr as sins. But of course, as we talked at length in last night's discussion, Rasulullah did not have any sins, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. So what does wizr refer to? Wizr, it refers to a weight. But it's not like wazn, it's not like haml. It's not something that can be carried. It is an overwhelming weight. It is a profound, severe weight. And Allah combines that in the next verse, الَّذِي أَنْقَضَ. And anqadha refers to bearing a burden so heavy that it is about to break. So whatever Rasulullah is bearing this burden, it is so heavy it cannot be handled and it is on the verge of breaking his back. And it refers to a number of different things. The fact that Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi that he had to go to the center of polytheism in Arabia. And he had to turn that well and that pit of darkness into a lantern for the rest of the world. That was incredibly difficult and impossible if you ask anybody beforehand, especially between these two great kingdoms, the Sasanians and the Byzantines. That was one sort of difficulty on his back, the weight of his mission. It also refers to the pain that he would feel when they would not convert or when they would cover up Islam, because he knew what they were doing was harmful to themselves and it hurt him. Again, it increases his capacity to bear suffering. But also, it refers to his ability to bear both the artificial pains and the natural ones. Artificial pains in that they were orchestrated by the oppression of the Makkans. When they would kill his supporters, they would torture them, they would attack Medina, so on and so forth. And the natural suffering that he would have, such as the death of Hazrat Abu Talib and Bibi Khadija. So all of these are encompassed in this great weight which is upon his back. But expansion of the chest is not enough for this great weight. And Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he understood this as well in Surah Taha, those verses we looked at. رَبِّ اشْرَحْ لِي صَدْرِي وَيَسِّرْ لِي أَمْرِي وَاحْلُلْ عُقْدَةً مِّن لِسَانِي يَفْقَهُ قَوْلِي. The dua does not end there. Nabi Musa alayhi salam recognizes that when he is going to stand against Fir'aun, he needs more than just the expansion of his chest. He continues verses 29 to 30. وَجَعَلْ لِي وَزِيرًا مِّنْ أَهْلِي هَارُونَ أَخِي. And give me a helper from my family, my brother Harun. أُشْدُدْ بِهِ أَزْرِي وَأَشْرِكْهُ فِي أَمْرِي. Augment my strength through him and let him share my task. The dua of the expansion of the chest alone is not enough. He needs a supporter from his family. He needs his brother. Nabi Musa alayhi salam needed Harun just like Rasulullah needed Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And when this verse descended, these verses in Surah Taha, when they descended, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, the great Sunni Mufassir, in his Tafsir Durr Manthur, he said that Rasulullah was on a mountain. And when he heard this dua of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he raised his hands to the heavens and he said, Ya Allah, ease the burden on my back through my brother Ali ibn Abi Talib. And his dua was accepted. Nobody helped the Holy Prophet like Imam Ali alayhi salam did. And you can look at it quantitatively as well. That every time Rasulullah had any difficulty in his life, he would always go to Imam Ali alayhi salam. Right from the beginning, right at the very early time of his message, when the Makkans would get children to throw stones at Rasulullah, Imam Ali alayhi salam was there. From Da'watul Ashira to every single battle, to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, to the conquest of Makkah. Every single time you follow the Holy Prophet's life throughout, this burden of the obstacles that he faces, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he lightens that burden on the Prophet's back through Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And this parallel between Nabi Musa alayhi salam and Hazrat Harun alayhi salam and Rasulullah and Imam Ali alayhi salam, it is one that is repeatedly drawn throughout the literature. For example, we read in Sahih Muslim, the book of the merits of the companions, the virtues of Imam Ali alayhi salam, that Rasulullah said to him, أَمَا تَرْضَى أَن تَكُونَ مِنِّي بِمَنْزِلَةِ هَارُونَ مِن مُوسَى إِلَّا أَنَّهُ لَا نُبُوَّ بَعْدِي. That is it not sufficient for you, O Imam Ali, that you are to me as Harun was to Musa? One of the most incredible ahadith, one of the most brilliant compliments that Rasulullah could give to anyone, especially when you look at the lives of Nabi Musa alayhi salam and Nabi Harun alayhi salam. And we can look at the fact that Imam Ali alayhi salam, he suffered many of the same tests that Rasulullah had faced. In the beginning, Rasulullah faced rejection. In the beginning, Imam Ali alayhi salam faced rejection. And then people came in droves. The same happened to Imam Ali alayhi salam. And then oppression continued again, and Imam Ali alayhi salam left this world knowing that his family would be oppressed, just like Rasulullah's family before him. Verse number 4. وَرَفَعْنَا لَكَ ذِكْرَكَ. And we raised for you your name, your renown. And it's interesting because according to most mufassirun, this verse was revealed in Makkah. So the Holy Prophet, his renown has been raised. It's the past tense here. His renown has been raised. He is known as Al-Amin and As-Sadiq. Despite everything that the Makkans are spreading about him, accusing him of being a madman, or a sorcerer, or a liar, or whatever other accusations they had against him, he still had the respect amongst the community. And that is what happens when we are sincere and we hold ourselves true to our values. Because if we are consistent with what we teach and with good godly values, and we go about our daily lives without lying, without cheating, without stealing, without talking bad about anybody else, so on and so forth, we embody these values, our reputation begins to spread. Not because we are trying to spread it, but because other people, they recognize this nur, this divine light that emanates from us as we emulate Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And hence we read in Dua Kumail, وَكَم مِّن ثَنَاءٍ جَمِيلٍ لَسْتُ أَهْلًا لَهُ نَشَرَتَ. And how many beautiful praises, Ya Allah, did you spread about me of which I was unworthy. And this is accompanied with the teachings of Islam. But also, sometimes in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He uses the past tense in order to refer to the future. Because He is saying this future event is so certain it may as well be written in the annals of history. And indeed, how has the Holy Prophet's name been raised? We can look at it on a few different levels. Number one, his name is paired with Allah's name. What greater compliment could there be? There is a beautiful hadith that Jibreel told Rasulullah that whenever my name is mentioned, Ya Muhammad, your name will be mentioned too. Allah pairs His name. And this is part of the love that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showcases for His Holy Prophet, as we get repeatedly in this surah. By definition, this is the greatest possible praise, number one. But number two, think about it. There are Muslims all around the world, right? About 1.8 billion Muslims in all corners of the earth. And we praise Rasulullah during our adhan, during our iqamah, during our tashahhud, and whenever we say salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So what does that mean? That means that every second of every day, not a moment goes by where at least one person on this planet is not sending their blessings upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. That is how Allah has raised the renown of His Holy Prophet. And another explanation of this raising of the name is that Allah had praised him in previous scriptures as well. And there are a number of prophecies from other holy books that we would refer to. And another way is that we find in Surah Al-Ahzab, verse number 56, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Inna Allah wa malaikatuhu yusalluna ala nabi, ya ayyuha alladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. That God and His angels bless the Prophet. So, O you who believe, also send your blessings upon the Holy Prophet. And so when we look at the way that Allah raises Rasulullah's name, it's interesting because we can connect this a little bit with the way we looked at Nasr of Allah in Surah al-Nasr. When Allah showcases His victory, it's not a simple victory. It's not just a way that we can appreciate, right? Not just a one-dimensional or two-dimensional approach. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing something, He does it properly beyond our wildest imaginations. Rasulullah is praised in the past. Rasulullah is praised in every second of the present. Rasulullah is praised in the future hatta yawmul qiyamah, and Rasulullah is not just praised on the earth but in the heavens above. Such is the rafa' that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done for the renown of Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And we can connect these verses as well, right? There's a cyclical structure that we can draw between them. Because at the beginning of the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that He broadened His chest, right? In order for Him to be able to receive the Quran and to give the Quran and explain the Quran. And His spreading of His renown, it is proof of the fact that He has indeed succeeded in spreading the Quran. So Allah returns to that, and the second way He returns to it is He talked about a burden bearing down on the back of the Holy Prophet. And He responds by what? Lifting up the renown of Rasulullah. So He goes by opposites in order to identify the difficulty and then to highlight Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's response. Beautiful cyclical structure that we see throughout the Holy Quran. فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. Surely with difficulty comes ease, with every difficulty comes ease. Two of the most famous verses of the Holy Quran. And they are commonly repeated and they are used throughout our lifetime. And they are linked to this idea of suffering. Because when we look around this world, we see a profound amount of suffering. It is impossible for us to truly appreciate how much there actually is. The suffering can be so great on a societal level, on an international level, on a personal level, that sometimes even living becomes a Herculean effort. We can suffer psychologically, we can suffer spiritually, we can suffer physically. And sometimes when we're caught down in the wells of despair, it can be very difficult to see any light going forward. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants ease for us. He says in the Holy Quran, Surah Baqarah verse 185, that He wants ease for us, not hardship. And again in Surah Talaq, one of the most profound verses of the Quran, verse number 7, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا ما آتاها سيجعل الله بعد عسر يسرا. Allah does not burden a soul with more than what it can handle. After hardship, indeed, God will bring ease. It's a recurrent message, an optimistic message that is woven into the fabric of the Quran. And yet, despite Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanting ease for us, we look around the world and we see that sometimes there is a lot of difficulty. There is a lot of tribulation. So what are some of the ways that we can approach it? What are some of the ways that we can understand the suffering in this world? Because one of the incredible aspects of the human being, of human nature, is our ability to rise up to whatever challenge comes our way. This is the central existentialist claim that we touched on a previous night. That however dark the world is around us, Allah has given us a divine spark that we can rise above it. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most famous German philosophers of all time, he writes in his Genealogy of Morals, man, the bravest animal, most prone to suffer, does not deny suffering as such. He wills it. He even seeks it out, provided he is shown a meaning for it, a purpose in the suffering. He who has a why can bear almost any how. So what are some of the ways that we can understand the why behind the suffering in this world? And it can get quite difficult when we approach this topic. It's quite a heavy topic at times. So we'll approach it in 4 steps. We'll look at suffering from 4 different angles in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us in this verse. The first is the danger of the opposite. Sometimes we think, right, we have a sort of conception about the world, about how we want our lives to be. That we want things to be easy. We don't want any difficulty. We want enough money to be able to do whatever we want. And we have some odd conception about what life would be like if it was perfect. That we'd be in some resort abroad just enjoying ourselves in the sun. And yet, if you actually analyze that, how long would that last for? How long before it gets boring? there actually is a danger to the lack of suffering. That there are a lot of thinkers in history that look at this idea of utopianism and they critique it. And perhaps the best, it is Fyodor Dostoevsky. And Dostoevsky, again, one of the most brilliant philosophers of all time, he is a Russian philosopher from Orthodox Christianity. And he writes on this exact subject in Notes from Underground. He says, "Now I ask you, what can be expected of man as being endowed with such strange qualities? Shower him with all earthly blessings. Drown him in happiness completely over his head that bubbles pop up onto the surface of happiness as they do on water. Give him such economic satisfaction that he has nothing left to do except to sleep, eat gingerbread, and not worry about the cessation of history. And here it is. That man, out of sheer ingratitude, sheer lampoonery, will do something nasty." What is Dostoevsky saying here? He's saying, give man everything. Give us whatever we could possibly want. Get rid of any and all suffering. And what will happen? You will awaken a beast within mankind. You'll create a new evil, the likes of which you haven't seen before. Why? Because it is inconsistent with our nature and our purpose in this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Holy Quran, Surah Mulk, verse number 2, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Why did Allah create us on this earth? To test us, to see who is the best in action. Part of our fitrah is to be able to respond to difficulty. Remove that difficulty entirely and it causes more problems than it solves. Why? Dostoevsky continues, if he finds himself without means, he will invent destruction and chaos. He will invent all kinds of suffering and still have his own way. He will release his curse upon the world, since man alone is able to curse. Does man not perhaps love something besides well-being? Perhaps he is just as fond of suffering. Perhaps suffering is just as great a benefit to human beings as is well-being. It is an undeniable fact. That is our association with that. And you can look at it in a way, right? You can look at people and see how we challenge ourselves. Who are the most successful people in the world? At least as per the most basic metrics that we can use, that we see on an obvious level. And they're the ones who push themselves, right? They will toil, they will try hard. After everything burns and aches, after they've reached the end of what they thought their capacity is, they continue to push forward. Look at athletes as an example, right? Some of the things they manage to accomplish are incredible. If you look at ultra-marathon runners who run preposterous distances, in times which, if you go back 100 years, people would say were actually physically impossible. Why? They go through all this toil, all this suffering, all this difficulty, because it is only through the fires of pain that a truly successful human being can be born. And Imam Ali salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he makes reference to this in a letter that he writes to one of his governors, Uthman bin Hanif, and he warns him about luxury. He cautions him against living a life without difficulty, and he gives us a profound analogy, an analogy for the ages. He says, look at the example of trees. Compare the tree in the garden, which gets all the care it needs, to the tree of the forest. How much grander, how much more brilliant is the tree that stands in the forest compared to this pale shadow that stands in a garden. And that takes us on to the second point as well. This bleeds into the second point relating to suffering, and that is that we learn from suffering. Because suffering, it is the rule of progress. It is necessary for us to be able to move forward. The most skillful of sailors are forged by the stormiest of seas. Imam al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is in Bihar al-Anwar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He helps His believer and He sends upon His believer hardship in the same way that a father would give gifts to his own family. Think about that for a moment. These hardships and difficulties, they are presents from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's one of the reasons, no matter what happens, good or bad, difficult or easy, we say Alhamdulillah. Because we are truly grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we understand the benefit therein. There's a similar hadith from RasoolAllah in Sahih al-Bukhari, that if Allah wills good for someone, He afflicts him with an affliction, with trials. And we read from Jalaluddin al-Rumi, who puts this in poetic verse. He says the analogy of a grain of wheat. They threw a grain on the earth, then came out the branches. Next, they crushed it in the mill, and it became more expensive. It became useful in the form of bread. Next, the bread was grounded under the teeth. And after digestion, that bread, it entered into the mind of the consumer, the spirit of the one who ate it, and it turns into useful thought. And when the mind was bewildered with love, what a surprise this cultivation has been. To go from a useless seed to become the spark of mankind's greatest thoughts, look how much trial and tribulation this grain had to go through before it showed its true colors and reached its potential. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he says, again in tradition in Bahar al-Anwar, that when Allah loves His slave, He drowns him in tribulation. Why? Because after equipping us with the basics, with the internal revelation of morality, with rationality, with the external revelation of the Holy Quran and the guidance of Ahlul Bayt, He has given us the basic equipment that we need. And then He throws us into the deep end. Because it is only with the fear of drowning that we can really rise up to the heights of our potential, that we push ourselves beyond. Now, at the beginning, we made reference to Shaykh al-Tabrasi's Majmu' al-Bayan. And behind this incredible work, arguably his magnum opus, there is an interesting story. Because he never planned to write this tafsir. But one day, he had a heart attack and he was pronounced dead. They took his body, they checked his pulse, he had expired. They did ghusl on the body, they put his kafan on, they took him slowly to the graveyard, and they buried him. After they left, after all their du'as had been recited, Shaykh al-Tabrasi, he opened his eyes. He wasn't dead. They had misdiagnosed him. Now you can imagine what kind of difficulty he's in now. He's under the earth, so he can barely move, and there's not much oxygen there. He won't be able to survive for long. What does he say? He says, Ya Allah, get me out of this situation, and I will write for you a tafsir like no other. It was another. A few moments later, there came the sound of digging above. As the digging got closer and closer, eventually it came close enough to Shaykh al-Tabrasi that he could move his hand. And he stuck his hand out from the grave. He grabbed the hand of whoever was there. You can imagine how terrified he must have been. He was a grave robber. He had come to steal Shaykh al-Tabrasi's kafan and sell it. And he must have thought when he saw a hand coming out of the earth, okay, that's my time has come. Allah is taking me down to hell. But Shaykh al-Tabrasi, he calms him down. He says, look, no, don't worry, just keep it calm. I'm not actually from hell. And he explained his story, holding on to this man. Eventually he calmed down. Shaykh al-Tabrasi, he said, okay, if you don't mind, go back to, first of all, get the rest of me out. And then go back to my house and get me some clean clothes. I want to take care of myself. I need to wash all of this dirt off, so on and so forth. So the grave robber did what he asked, and Shaykh al-Tabrasi, he said, I'm going to give you something now, after which you'll never be in poverty. So he gave him a lot of advice and riches so that he would never have to grave rob again. And he did a lot of istighfar as well after seeing this sign from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah had chosen this grave robber as a wasila. It was the tariqah that he had used, the way he used to answer Shaykh al-Tabrasi's dua. And now that he's out of the grave, he's dressed up, he just walks straight back home. People, they thought, we buried you earlier today. What's going on? You can only imagine their surprise. Not a moment's delay. Shaykh al-Tabrasi, he went straight to his table, his desk, he sat down and he started writing Majmu' al-Bayan. one of the most celebrated tafsirs in the Shia school of thought, which is indispensable when looking at the Holy Quran. And it was born out of what? You can only imagine what went through his mind at that time of tribulation. And sometimes it can even just be something minor, right? Sometimes we just want to prove people wrong. People are naysaying us all the time. They're saying terrible things about how we can't accomplish anything. What greater satisfaction can there be to rise above it and to prove them wrong, not with our words, but with our actions? That is the second reflection on suffering. The third reflection is that we learn by opposites. Part of the nature of how human beings learn is by seeing opposite things. If something comes easy, without trying, without working hard, without toiling, it's not worth very much, right? If everybody could do, with 5 minutes of practice, what athletes could do, they wouldn't be paid what they're paid. Right? If we get a load of money, right, and you can actually look at lottery winners, it's quite interesting to see what happens to them psychologically and materially. And you can look at the children of very rich and successful people, particularly of the celebrity tilt, who have everything they could possibly want, and yet they live their lives miserably unhappy. Because what comes easy, you don't appreciate the value. It's only after we have privation that we understand what blessings are. And Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi, he tells us in a hadith that, do you know that with inna ma'al usri yusra, that with difficulty comes ease, with patience comes victory, and with distress comes relief. This compound good, impossible to achieve without a difficulty. The great poet Khalil Gibran, he writes, I learned silence from the talkative, tolerance from the intolerant, kindness from the unkind, and yet I am ungrateful to all these teachers. Difficulty, stress, it teaches us, so long as we move it forwards. And to summarize this point, one of the best novels that has been written is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. And it's beyond the scope of the discussion to dive into the novel itself. But there's a part of the novel where the Count of Monte Cristo, he takes someone who's on the depths of suffering, they're on the verge of suicide, and then he brings him into happiness. And he says to this character that there is neither happiness nor misery in the world. There is only comparison of one state to the other, nothing more. He who has felt the deepest grief, only he is able to experience supreme happiness. That we can only know goodness and happiness based on comparison. If we only have goodness in our lives, everything goes well, then we don't appreciate what we have. And that leads us on as well, it leads into the last point, which is a point about self-imposed suffering. That a lot of suffering and happiness is to do with internal issues rather than external issues. Because we have this expectation, I'm a good Muslim, I said La ilaha illallah Muhammad RasoolAllah, I read Quran, I pray my namaz, I fast, I'm kind to people, I do my amr bil ma'roof, nahi anil munkar, I pay my zakat, I go for hajj, so on and so forth. Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing this to me? We often ask, that's one of the most dangerous questions, isn't it? Why me? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he reverses the question. He says, suffering is part of the world. Why not you? Why are you exceptional? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Surah Baqarah, verse 214. أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you expect to enter the garden, paradise, without first having suffered like those before you? مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله. Those before you, they were afflicted with such misfortune and happiness. They were so shaken that even their prophet and his followers said, where is the help of Allah? ألا إن نصر الله قريب. Surely Allah's help is near. If anyone in the history of mankind deserved to live their life without suffering, it was Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Who are we to expect immunity? It doesn't make sense. But Allah also, He laces this with that optimism that is there throughout the Holy Quran. That Allah's help, His nasr, is near. And what is the importance of the internal psychological state? It is that contentment. As Imam Ali salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi says, in Nahjul Balagha, there is no treasure that is more precious than contentment. Why? Because all other treasures are relative. Relative by what? By this instrument of contentment. If we have rida, if we have contentment, whatever we have, it becomes the greatest treasure. And we do shukr, and we're more appreciative. Sometimes we get greedy. Sometimes we want more than what is due. And when you think about it and you analyze it, what we needed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given it to us all along. And that we are suffering because we have misinterpreted the world and our place in it. There's a story about a Mexican fisherman. He lives in a small Mexican town, and he's the only fisherman in that area. And every day he goes into the lake and he fishes, he gets enough fish for his family, and he's done for the day. There's a businessman who's walking by, who's taking a holiday there, and he sees the quality of the fish that the fisherman has brought. And he says, wow, these are amazing fish. How long did it take you to get them? The Mexican fisherman, he said, not too long, just maybe an hour or two. The American man said, an hour or two? Then what are you going to do with the rest of your day? He said, well, I'm going to go home. I'm going to have a nice lunch with my family. I'm going to spend time with my kids, with my wife. I'm going to relax. I'll probably go out later and I'll spend some time with my friends, and I'll go to sleep early. The American man said, no, you've got this all wrong. All wrong. You're the only fisherman here. What you should be doing, right? Spend the 2 hours to get what you need, but then stay out there for the rest of the day. Catch as many fish as you can. Eat what you need, but then sell the ones that you have left. Do this for a little while, and you'll get enough profit that you can then buy more boats. And with more boats, you can then get more fish. And by getting more fish, you'll then be able to employ more people. And then you'll be able to you'll establish a company. And then in order to be the head of this company, you'll need to move over to the capital, to Mexico City. And there you'll be head of coordination, which has a whole fleet of boats. And then eventually you can sell this company and you can make millions. The Mexican fisherman, he's looking at him, he's smiling. He says, okay. And then what? He says, well, once you've done all that, once all is said and done, you can move to a nice coastal Mexican town. And you can spend the day with your family. You can have a nice lunch with your kids. You can spend time with your wife. And maybe in the evenings you can go out and spend time with your friends. The Mexican fisherman smiled and looked at him. He says, brother, I'm already doing that every day, and I didn't need to waste 20 years to get there. Inna ma'al usri yusra. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He makes the yusra, it is the more important aspect of this verse, of these two verses which are repeated. Why? Because the difficulty has a definite article. Inna ma'al usr, al-usr, referring to a particular. There is one difficulty, whereas yusra is indefinite. It can be multiple, it can be many. And it is mentioned twice, right? So in the second verse, when Allah is saying al-usr, it still refers to the difficulty from the first verse. But because the yusra is indefinite, it refers to countless other eases. And also it is related to inna. It is the main subject of the sentence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying here. That ease is the more natural state. And that suffering is that which is to be mitigated. And there's that famous hadith from RasoolAllah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. In Ibn Kathir's tafsir, he says that one instance of hardship, one usr, will never come unless accompanied by two eases, yusrain. And so there is an asymmetry, there is a balance between the two. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly, He moves us towards this optimism. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Surah Anfal, verse number 10. وَمَا جَعَلَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بُشْرًا وَلِتَطْمَئِنَّ بِهِ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Allah has made this a message of hope to reassure your hearts. Help comes only from Allah, the Mighty, the Wise. And there is repetition twice. Why repetition? Of course, number one, the basic answer is emphasis. Right? Number one. But number two, the Mufassirin, they say that in ma'al usri yusra, there is double emphasis. One for the difficulties of the past, one for the difficulties of the future. Other Mufassirin, they say that some are for the difficulties of this life while we get the benefit in the next life. But one of the most beautiful interpretations is looking at the compassion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When someone is really suffering, when they're really in times of difficulty, what do? You go up to them and you tell them, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It is as if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is holding our hand. And He is compassionately telling us, consoling us again and again, that don't worry. With every difficulty, there comes ease. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. But we can't straw man, because you can't look at all suffering in the world and say that all of it results in good. You can't. A lot of suffering ends in death. A lot of it ends in destruction. And a lot of it, we look at it and it seems wanton. It seems without direction. Right? And that is why the ultimate relief, that although whatever suffering comes our way, we try and rise above it, even if it kills us, our ability to stay noble in that situation, it allows us to rise above everything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He will not put any burden upon a soul that it cannot bear, not upon a body. Because we are more than our physical bodies, that even as our bodies decay, we can rise up spiritually. And hence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's greatest relief comes in the akhirah. That again, we return to just a quote from Monte Cristo, the Count of Monte Cristo, until the day that God will deign to reveal the future to man, all of human wisdom is contained in two words: wait and hope. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala approaches us on the day of judgment when we have gone through difficulty, there are countless narrations which talk about divine compensation. That when you have suffered so much, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will balance the scales. There are countless narrations. Some that tell us that even if we are tortured in this world, we would wish that we could come back to be tortured more. But one of the most wonderful is in Usul al-Kafi. Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. He says that Allah, exalted be His praise, apologizes to His believing servant who is in need. Allahu Akbar. Allah apologizes. Allah apologizes to His servant who is needy in this world in the same way that a brother apologizes to another brother. And he says, by my honor and my majesty, I did not make you needy in this world because of anything that you did wrong. And now I raise the veil from your eyes. See what has laid in wait for you. And the man, when he looks at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him, he will raise his head and exclaim, that which you deprived me of, that difficulty which you made me go through does not harm me one bit when compared to how much you have compensated me with. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The next verse, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ. And when everything is done, when you have completed, toil more, struggle more. And the word fansab, one of the meanings is struggle, right? That when you find something difficult, you keep going forward. So whenever we think that we have accomplished enough, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, don't get complacent. Keep going, do more. And usually when we look at the Quran, this word is mentioned 11 times in the Quran, and mostly it refers to that meaning. Fansab, toil. But there is another meaning as well. So for example, we read in Surah 70 verse 43, it refers to the planting of a flag or a goal. And in Surah Ghashi'ah, it refers to the lifting of the mountains high. And another meaning of fansab is to nominate, is to appoint. And hence we read a tradition from Imam as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, that he says in Shawahid al-Tanzil that when you finish this fansab, it refers to the appointment of the walayah of Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. In the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises the mountains high, Rasulullah took the hand of Imam Ali, raised it high and said, Man kuntum mawla fahada aliyun mawla. So that is one of the interpretations of fansab. And there are commentators as well. This is, of course, purely from the school of Ahlul Bayt. So the tafsirs from the school of Ahl Sunnah, of course, they don't theologically agree with this. But it seems like the logical culmination of these two surahs, of Surah Duha and Surah al Sharh, that you've gone through this difficulty, you've gone through all of this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed you with this blessing and with that blessing. You've struggled here, there, and now when you've finished, when all is said and done, protect your legacy and appoint Imam Ali alayhi salam. And such is the importance of legacy, because it's important for the Holy Prophet to keep this message together. Because Rasulullah, he comes, he teaches us everything, right? He tells us how to eat, how to drink, our akhlaq in public, how to work, our roles in society, so on and so forth. He even tells us how to brush our teeth, how to enter the bathroom. And yet on the issue of leadership after him, where legacy is the most important thing for any leader who has established anything of worth in history, he's supposed to have stayed silent. It doesn't fit, certainly not within from the Shia viewpoint. And the final verse, وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَب. And let your desire be only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now there are two ways in which we can interpret this. One is pairing it with Surah Baqarah verse 152. فَاذْكُرُونِي أَذْكُرُكُمْ وَاشْكُرُوا لِي وَلَا تَكْفُرُوا. That remember me, Allah is saying this in the Quran. Remember me and I will remember you. Be grateful to me and don't be ungrateful. That whenever we go through whatever happens in life, be it that we perceive it to be good or bad, we always say Alhamdulillah. Because if we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He promises that He will remember us. But there is another message as well that we find within this verse. Because it is also an implication towards the decline of the Holy Prophet, towards his death. That he is about to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are a number of narrations as well that talk about the fact that Rasulullah is the only one who was asked by Malik al-Maut. That he had, that the angel of death needed permission from him. That Rasulullah had a choice. But of course, when he is given the choice between the dunya and the akhirah, between mankind and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he makes the obvious decision.